and we're good to go.
Okay, I'm going to probably minimize my screen here. Oops. There. Okay. Well, my name's Gary Wyatt. I'm extension educator with the University of Minnesota Extension. Basically, well, next week it'll be 39 years. So I'm kind of an old extension educator from the county days, county agent days. Worked myself up in a 2-agent county. Still live in that 2-agent county that I started in 1983. Most of you probably weren't born at that time. And in fact, I can almost guarantee it by your looks there. Anyway, tongue in cheek. Yeah, Watonwan County means fish bait, and it's a real small county. We had a 2-agent county. I was ag and conservation and 4-H, and then I worked with a coworker of home ec and 4-H as well. So let's get started. I did have some slides here on, I think, there we go, on our statewide forestry group. So Eli Sagor in the lower left is our program coordinator and extension specialist. He's our supervisor of this group. I'm in the southern part of the state. Mankato is actually where Angie is at. And then I'm in like Wilmer, but the picture is, but I'm actually where Angie should be geographically in the state. The people in green are our forestry team. We're getting a new forest educator, forest health up in Duluth, Cloquet area with Jeff Jackson. And then Emily Domex on St. Paul campus. She's our program manager, does our communications and newsletter and so forth. And then Angie Gupta is my coworker in Rochester. So Rochester's southern part of the state. It's just southeast. I'm southwest, and Mankato, more center part of the state. And I'm more in agroforestry than our forestry team is. I also invasive species. These others, Megan and Pat in blue, are our aquatics team, aquatic invasives, and then our pink team is Amy and Britt, and Andrea are our master naturalists, and they're SITSI Master Naturalists group. Agroforestry, some of you may know, if you're SWCD, I'm sure you know this. Agroforestry is silvopasture, forest farming, windbreaks, alley cropping, repairing forest buffers. So of the 5 practices, probably the most widely used in Minnesota is windbreaks. We are really seeing a big increase in wanting to change the practices of silvopasture, of woodland grazing, which is basically just turning out the cows and the sheep and so forth, livestock into timber without management. But we're seeing a really good emergence of more education and more sustainable farming practices for silvopasture. I'll talk about that in just a minute. The spin on forest farming of food forest basically is kind of the food forest spin, generating food from trees and shrubs, roots and nuts and so forth. And obviously you can plant those in different locations as well. Alley cropping, there's not much of, and obviously we do have some riparian buffers and so forth in Minnesota. So real quickly, so why silvopasture now in Minnesota? We have several groups that are partnering with us in education and also logistics and cost share programs. And farmers are willing to be more sustainable these days, which is really interesting and becoming more popular. Our Minnesota SWCD Soil Water Conservation District has supported resolutions with their boards and their state boards that manage those systems to support the NRCS silvopasture standard. And we have now a silvopasture standard in Minnesota, which we didn't have before. So that's cool. So we have several NRCS practices now that actually qualify for silvopasture. Actually, I applied, I have 10 acres of pasture myself, and I've qualified for actually brush management, fencing, and water facility, or developing a water tank and so forth. And actually the NRCS district person in our office in our county decided not to use silvopasture, but use all 3 of these, and thought there was more money involved instead of the silvopasture one. So that was kind of interesting. We recently completed a $750,000 grant of oak savanna restoration through silvopasture. And that grant is not online yet, but we'll try and get it online soon. In collaboration with these agencies and really helped in getting the word out. Our Sustainable Farming Association of Minnesota is just really dynamite. They've got many staff on hand, and I'll show you one that's working on that. And Tyler Carlson is their Silvopasture and Agroforestry project lead in their organization, Sustainable Farming Association. So different organizations, even land stewardship and other organizations that are farmer-led, are behind sustainable farming practices, and probably are in your state as well. So there's some case studies that are pictured here on their website. I urge you to click on that and download those. Those are farmer to farmer talks. Basically, it goes through a farmer's practice of what they're doing in silvopasture on their farm. And it's basically a network, a publication to get farmers to do the right thing and to learn from other farmers. I've got the website. The website's there on the bottom, but also I think on this next screen. So it's sfa-mn.org is the Sustainable Farming Association one website. And then from there, you can go on to Silvopasture and Agroforestry. They have a beginning grazer handbook. It's really good information, and just a great organization that worked with us on this grant and really have promoted silvopasture in the state of Minnesota. And all their members know about silvopasture, and many of them trying to do it. This is our extension website on agroforestry. This is our website on the left, and on the right is our BMP publication that you can download that's online. And it's just basically the BMP's best management practices for silvopasture in Minnesota, which certainly should be similar probably to Washington State, although your plants might be different than ours. We're finding that orchard grass and red clovers are really good shade tolerant type grasses and forbs that you can interseed into some of the woodlands that we have in Minnesota. We developed a silvopasture learning network, and we had I think 500 people, 600 people sign up for this. This is kind of a social media, but yet a website that you can connect with others, and a lot of our information is on there as well. And actually, due to our low capacity in extension through retirements and people moving on in forestry, we've actually passed this on to the Sustainable Farming Association group to manage. And back to Tyler Carlson on the Sustainable Farming Association. He's working on a silvopasture financial assessment tool, which is still being developed. I don't think he's done with it yet, but some of our staff on University of Minnesota campus and our farm business management section is working with him on this, and some other people. So that might be coming out, and that might be worthwhile to keep abreast of. But Tyler Carlson's your contact for the SFA organization in silvopasture in Minnesota. We've got another tool that's really helpful, and this might be something you could probably copy maybe for farmers in Washington State. These are farmers telling their stories on doing different things. It's the sustainable practices, but telling their story, and then hopefully farmers will learn from them. We've got different groups, case studies, that we're calling them case studies: soil health, silvopasture cases, and then also snow fences. Either they're living snow fences or structural snow fences. Maybe they work with MnDOT. The Minnesota DOT, Department of Transportation, actually pays farmers for standing corn rows or leaving hay bales next to state highways that have state snow problem areas in the wintertime. And then they also pay for structural snow fences, or they buy the land, 25 feet of land for a structural snow fence. And then they will work with NRCS in the living snow fence type practices. So that's kind of cool. This is just a short detail of what this looks like. If you click on one of those little icons, it goes into details of what the farmer's name is, where he's at, phone number, contact information, and they've been basically told that they might get contacted by a farmer about their practice. So these are farmers that are leaders in the community. They're willing to tell their story and tell other farmers what they're doing, and talk about their sustainable practices. It's pretty cool. Obviously, if you're not familiar with the USDA's National Agroforestry Center at Lincoln, Nebraska, you need to be. These are great resources. They have videos, they have webinars over the years, and also publications you can order free of charge. All the 5 practices of agroforestry are covered. I just show the picture here of silvopasture. That might be it on silvopasture, but keep your chat going on questions, and we're going to start with food forests. How about that? Here we go. Hang on your seat. Riparian buffers. In Minnesota, we had in, I think, 2015, our governor suggested or made a law basically that says you have to have a buffer between your cropland and a waterway or a ditch. And I'll go into that a little bit later. Well, we'll talk about community food forests in Minnesota, Laverne, Twin Cities, Moorhead, and then some others. And then also the community food forest in the U.S. Catherine Bertowski, she was at Virginia Tech. I don't know where she's at. She might be a private consultant. She's done a lot of research on this, and I've got a lot of her slides by permission. And then we'll talk about some plants producing fruits and nuts that you probably can grow out there in Washington. At the state there, the Minnesota State Fair, I have 3 stages that I speak on. The U of M stage, University of Minnesota Extension, or actually University of Minnesota has a sidewalk preacher style stage. I talk about edibles and fruits and nuts for your backyard or woodland. And then I give out these jar grippers, and this might be something you may want to do. I'll send you one, Pat, certainly. An extension, you can put your food safety questions on there, work with your food safety staff. We have an answer line with agreement with the University of Minnesota University, or the Iowa State University staff. It's a parent homeowner question line. You can ask about baby questions to canning and food questions, all kinds of stuff that way. That's what we call an answer line. And then we have our food safety extension website, and then also the National Center for Home Food Preservation for canning and so forth, questions there. So I thought it was a great idea. I actually developed this in 2013. We didn't have funds for it until basically I said, I'm old enough, I got enough funds saved up, I can pay for these myself. I can't get any money from the university, so I hand out about 300 of these every year at State Fair, and I think it's a great idea. Jar gripper on food safety in the kitchen. How about that? And then this one just came out not too long ago from North Dakota. This is the Windbreak Cookbook. How about that? Featuring fruits from the prairie forest. Whoops, dang it. I got a trigger finger here. Sorry about that. Getting ready for deer hunting season. So fruits and nuts that you can have in your windbreaks, and all kinds of agroforestry practices, shrubs and trees. But it's out of North Dakota. The Z link, I just got z.un.edu and then /NDSU Windbreak Cookbook, and that should get you there. Otherwise, you can look at it online. At almost every talk now, we talk about the ecological classification or the native plant communities in Minnesota. So the DNR, or Department of Natural Resources in Minnesota, has put together natural plant communities in every part of the state. So people can look on this and find their location in their state, where they live or where they have property, and then find out what the pre-settlement vegetation might have been before our settlers and before farming was implemented in the state of Minnesota. So it's kind of cool to kind of look into the situation of understory plants and trees and shrubs that should be growing in there or had been growing in your location. And we always ask people to look up their location, or woodland, and see what was there before, and if they want to reestablish some of those plants, they certainly could. This is the productive buffer demo. This is planted in 2018 before the epidemic, or the pandemic, I guess. And this is an edible, basically demo. In Minnesota, we were basically a law was mandated by farmers, not too much saved by farmers. And I'll give you that. Okay, 16.5 feet between a ditch and a planting, or so we thought maybe a single row could be planted to anything. You could plant alfalfa in it. You could plant just anything, grasses. If you had dairy animals, like we were talking about earlier, or beef animals, or some type of animal that would eat hay, you could hay it, you could graze it, as long as it's not in a government program or NRCS program. And a lot of people did get this into a buffer system that was paid for through the NRCS office for 15 years of cash rent, which is a dynamite program. So 16.5 feet from the ditch to the crop. And then on a waterway or a lake situation, you had to be 50 feet away. So we made 4 rows of edibles, and then 1 row of edibles for the 16.5 foot buffer. And then just as a demo, I don't think a lot of people did this, because we did this maybe 2 years after the implementation of the law, but just as an example of what people can do. And we had American plum, cranberry, Nanking cherry, black chokeberry, which is aronia berry, hazelnut, elderberry, juneberry, serviceberry, which are the same as Saskatoon's too. and then honeyberries. So we had those in the buffer. And that's what it looked like in 2021. And we had hazelnuts and elderberries the first year, believe it or not, and maybe larger plants that were planted, but we caged them because of deer predation in this area, mainly. I think we could take those off pretty much now, but yeah, as you can see, that's a hazelnut plant in the right screen there, and that had some hazelnuts on it, and yeah, some of the bushes are just really gathering into that little chicken wire screen there. And there was our planting again. Okay, now community food forests. So trees and shrubs producing edible fruits and nuts, plus maybe you could include annual and perennial vegetables. Some fruits are high maintenance, like the apples, and certainly our raspberries now with our spotted wings or Drosophila. I'm not sure if you have that insect in Washington or not, but we have it basically all throughout the state of Minnesota. High maintenance trees and shrubs may need volunteers to adopt to these sites. Policies need to be created about public harvest, and then planted on public or private property. We have examples of each. So perennial edibles, I don't need to go through a big list, but obviously the vegetative are the asparagus, rhubarb, strawberries, just to mention a few. And then the woodies, certainly starting out with the apples and aronia berry. That's black chokeberry there on the far right. So the benefits of a green infrastructure, urban landscapes, community food forest, could be on a riparian forest floodplain, community windbreaks, could be a living snow fence, could be wildlife corridors, pollinator gardens, retaining stormwater, phytoremediation areas. All these can be planted to fruit-bearing trees and shrubs. Simple. We have a project, Food Forest, out of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And this is really close to Laverne, Minnesota. It's just across the border, about 40 miles, 30 miles away from each other, actually. Actually, the leader of our food forest in Laverne actually is the CEO of this group right now. So projectfoodforest.org. It's a website. They promote food forests around the Midwest, around the country. So you can certainly look at that for more information. Our food forest in Laverne, Minnesota, that I've helped with, this is looking at the tree planting. The tree planting of the apple trees and fruit trees, plums, and so forth on the south end of the property. This is a privately owned land, and we're looking into the city of Laverne maintenance shop area. And it right to the right of that, we're looking south, and it's adjacent or follows along the trail of a paved trail that goes north and south to a state park, and that's heavily traveled. So this borders this private food forest on private land. A homeowner basically said, let's do this. And it borders the walking trail and biking trail there. So what they did, they have a narrow piece that is in this schematics. So the southern part was the apples and so forth. And I think I have a blown up picture of this in the next couple of slides. But you can see the far end is serviceberry, and the middle part is hazelnut and honeyberry and mulberry. So this blown up part, this is on the north end, elderberry, shade garden, raspberries they have along that shade area, Nanking cherry, hazelnut. They have clumps of plants in mulches, and I'll show you some pictures of that too. Here's the south end. The south end with the trees, plums, and persimmons. Believe it or not, planted some persimmons. They have a pawpaw that's growing out there. If you've not heard of Red Fern Farm, of course, that's a little, you're different climate than we are, but Red Fern Farm is a nursery down in southeast Iowa, not Minnesota. And we've gotten some of our plants from down there. They're growing persimmons and also pawpaws. I have a pawpaw that survived winter, believe it or not, in Minnesota last year. My persimmons, I had two, and I don't think they made it. So, I'm always encouraging people to try new things with climate change. And maybe you have some ideas of plants to try in Washington State there. But don't plant 100 of them, but you want to order 2 or 3 and see if they work, fine. This is the Prairie Alley Food Forest in Laverne. They have a kiosk there and signage, and they also have a map, as I showed you there earlier, a copy of their map that shows what the plants are in the food forest. This is their walking trail to the north. Now we're looking to the north, a little parking area there. To the back side of us is the maintenance area of Laverne, Minnesota. And so that's a nice paved trail that goes north out of town, and they are getting master gardeners and other volunteers to help manage this prairie garden and food forest in Laverne. And there's the kiosk and the big signage, and that's about it. The house is in back there, and that's about as big as it is. It's pretty narrow, but that's all it needs to be. And it's a very nice place. Okay, so there's the path on the left and the street, and then you've got the border of it's kind of a high ridge there that goes down into the creek area where the buffer is planted. So this area is planted to shade tolerant type of plants along this tree ridge, and then in the middle there for full sun is some of the other plants and shrubs, currants and Juneberries and honeyberries and those types of things, and some of the annuals and perennials are planted in there. So this is a very north part of the plot looking south, and you can see it's pretty narrow, but all of the trees and shrubs are mulched and usually protected for deer and rabbit predation. The first couple of years this was developed, and you see that slope to the left of that. Okay, signage. We do have signage on most of these plants. This is plums. I think I have a honeyberry sign that's closer to looking at the information that we have on there a little bit later. They have a website, or it's actually a website and a Facebook. This is their Facebook, I believe, and you can find the hours and so forth. This is a website that we did an article about it on our University of Minnesota Extension website. So it's just the Z-Link UM Food Forest, if you want to find out more information. Now I'll just go through some examples real quickly. So some food forests. Here's Roseville, Minnesota. This is near St. Paul, near the campus of UM. It's an orchard on the west side of the Arboretum in that community of Roseville. Area is fenced and locked. It will typically be unlocked Monday through Friday during the growing season when staff are present, and Patty Sullivan's in charge of that. Now, I can't remember the rules for taking goods out of that. If you have to volunteer to actually take produce out of the food forest here, or fruits, most of them are apple trees, I believe, but that's the policies you have to work with. And some of these community food forests are only the volunteers that work on the property get the chance of taking some of the produce out, or some of them are open up to the public anytime you want to come, and no fence and those types of things, from very restrictive to really non-restrictive. This is Adams Grove in Minneapolis. You can see the peach trees, apricot trees, believe it or not, apple, crabapple, plums, cherry, pear they've tried, and also service berries. This is one out of Calgary, Canada, which I thought was pretty cool. Very laid out, very drafted schematic here. Pears and also apples are mainly on here, and honeycrisp and other apples. This is out of Moorhead, Minnesota, up north, and this is by Fargo, and this is a community landscape of city-owned land, but you can see that they're ronia berry, chestnut, crab, apples and hazelnuts and Juneberry and so forth. We got there a lot of apple trees, it looks like, and plum. Alderman plum is a good plum we have in Minnesota. This is a nice schematic from NDSU, North Dakota State University. They have a bulletin that I'll show a little bit later. Designs for community food forest. And so you look at this map, and I just listed a few things to consider. Shade versus full sun, pollinator plant distance, like honeyberries really need to be close together to pollinate each other, and you have to have the right combination of honeyberries. Clusters of plants, okay, consider that. Consider mixed clusters of plants. Space between plants is good. As they grow, always think of the mature height and width of these plants that you're planting, and make sure you give plenty of space between plants, because people will be managing weeds and so forth between them. Protection from critters, rabbits, voles, those wintertime critters, and obviously deer. Weed control mulch is really paramount. And then perimeter fence, deer and people might be a possibility on that design, wherever you might have it. And then signage, garden plants and on the garden, and then plants signage as well. And I'll show you a few of those. But this is kind of a neat little schematics, just a plan that anybody can develop. Raspberries, pears, what's on top, these apples, miscellaneous small fruits, grapes down the right-hand side, Juneberry, plums, flowers. There's Juneberry on the south side on the left, apricots, cherries, crab apples in the middle. And yeah, kind of cool. And this is part of Catherine Rakowski's book. She's had a book, and I obviously one of her graduate study work was looking at community food forests around the country. So I've got a few of her slides we're going to show. And this is Bloomington, Indiana community food forest in 2010. And you see that some of these are well managed for weeds, and some of them are not. This is out of Seattle, Washington. There you go, in your state there. Pat, I'm not sure if you've been there or anybody else has been there, but looks like there's no fence around this. Yeah, this is Iowa City, Iowa, down by University of Iowa. And I think that might be the same place, but you notice here's strawberries and asparagus there in the foreground. Looks like some apple trees or some type of tree fruits in the back there. Here's a fenced area, both fenced. I'm not sure why they're fencing the individual plant inside the fence, unless that's a people fence on the other and just a one-sided fence on that side and not an open on the other side. But it seems like if you had a deer fence that tall, you wouldn't be fencing the inside trees, just a thought. But they've got some chairs there. You can sit down and relax in the food forest. This one, particular one. This is pretty cool signage here. The edible forest snack garden. I love it. And it's got a little bit of the permaculture type design there. And a lot of these are designed kind of permaculturally, looking at harmonizing different plants, working with different plants, and using plants and understory and vines and so forth, and then upper story. So here's just another signage. Here's a Facebook and educational, open to all, sun up, sundown, demonstrates sustainable agriculture, permaculture, food forest, and seed saving garden. Roger Williams Park Edible Forest Garden. And you know, these are called forest gardens, food forests, all kinds of things. But basically fruits and nuts producing from shrubs and trees. And then obviously some perennials in there, and maybe some annuals. You might have an annual place. I thought this was very interesting in Catherine's studies. This is, believe it or not, in different languages. And certainly in Minnesota, we have different cultures in our larger cities. And yeah, if you have a community food forest that's in a community that has different cultures, this is really recommended. This is totally cool. It's maybe too much writing, but I critique that as a challenge, but certainly getting the educational message across of what these plants are and what the purpose of this garden is. Okay, here's an up-close picture of the NDSU bulletin. And then also, I've got that as a Z-link. You can find it, ND Food Forest, after the Z-link. And then here's a copy of our honeyberry signage that we have just at one of the plants. And it just talks about the benefits of just a little bit of history of what they're used for, and then the health benefits as well. And this was done with the combination of our SNAP Ed nutritional education people, and then also the partnership with Southwest Minnesota counties. Community Food Forest. This is Catherine Brodowski's Facebook, I believe, or was it website? Website must be. And then she has a Facebook. This is our Facebook there. Certainly, you can involve volunteers. I'm sure you have master gardeners, master naturalists, maybe you have tree care advocates or advisors out there. There's different local groups, even Sertomas or Lions Club. Some of the community groups that you have in your community could certainly be volunteers. Even the neighborhoods, just the families in the neighborhood could volunteer to help out with some of these corner block areas, or a triangle shaped type piece of your community that's just being mowed and could be planted to, it's full sun, could be planted to some shrubs in a corner, make it easier mowing. maybe you don't have to plant the whole thing, but maybe some of these triangle corners that are hard to mow around, plant them into, maybe have a honeyberry corner and a Juneberry corner and a hazelnut corner or something like that. So here's a backyard calendar on Haskap's is basically the blue honeysuckle or honeyberry as we call them. So there's three different terms there. Haskap is a Canada term, and then also blue honeysuckle. Actually, one of our invasive species groups were concerned that honeyberries were invasive because they're kind of related to the honeysuckle varieties, but not to the European varieties that are invasive. We haven't seen them go off the property yet. So yeah, there you go. And then you got Saskatoons, which is synonymous with Juneberries, serviceberries, sour cherries, raspberries, grapes along the bottom, strawberries along the top, and plums and apples certainly toward the end of the season. So perennial edibles, these are kind of edibles that I threw in there that are just in your backyard or on your driveway. Okay. Dandelion, plantain, we did some of this education in COVID. What are some edibles that just looking around your yard that you can find? And then obviously rhubarb and asparagus are the old ones that you can plant. If you don't have them already planted in your gardens around your place, you can certainly plant them and they're perennial. Apples, grapes, raspberries, blackberries. In University of Minnesota, we have obviously a Honeycrisp, but we've developed a lot of different apples, a lot of different grapes have been developed by the University of Minnesota. You probably grow them out there. Maybe some of your orchards have them out there. And there's a websites for apples and grapes, just .umn.edu. There's tons of native berries, mainly in northern Minnesota, but we can incorporate those. We have 40 schools in the state of Minnesota that have school forest. And I've done some research on if they have edibles or not. And most of them do not, but they're interested in learning more about them. So they're maybe going to plant some. And high bush cranberry to boysenberry, raspberry, elderberries, those are cranberries that are really common to be planted in those landscapes. Okay, now on the home stretch, I got just a few slides on some plants that you can plant that I encourage people to plant. If you have grandkids or kids, I encourage you to plant serviceberry, Juneberry, Saskatoon, one of those, and they're tree types to shrub types. Just find some different varieties that really produce. They're really good off the plant. You don't need to make jams and jellies about them. They're very sweet. And then the other one is hazelnuts. So if you just have two places for two shrubs, they're all self-pollinating. Juneberry, Saskatoon plant, and then a hazelnut plant. Currants, there's many currants out there. I'm sure you've got many different currants out there that you can grow. Whoops. There's a golden currant that I don't have here. Red and black, I believe golden, and there's probably so many more also. And then apples are numerous. I basically say to people, talk to the orchards in your area to see what apple varieties grow best, and then select those varieties that you could purchase. We have some varieties in Minnesota that are only purchased by orchards. Homeowners cannot purchase them, like Sweet Tango is one of them. I don't know if you've heard that variety or not, but Sweet Tango cannot be purchased. It's a developed apple from the University of Minnesota, but it cannot be purchased for homeowners. It can only be purchased by orchards for a patent reason. American plum, my American plums are pretty much wildlife plums, but there's a lot of different plum varieties that are edible for humans. So be aware of that. And then also be aware that American plum will sucker. So don't plant it in your driveway or your front yard that you mow around. That may be a problem. So some of these plants sucker, so they may want to be careful about that. Nanking cherry is died off from my landscape sometimes. I don't have a lot of them left, but certainly it's one to try. Don't plant 200 of them, but plant a couple if you like and see if they overwinter for you. Here's the hazelnuts, American hazelnuts. They're becoming better and better. We're trying to actually through Wisconsin and Minnesota, we're trying to develop kind of a hybrid basically that's going to be a bigger nut and better survival type shrub. But they are showing this fall too. They have some orange color to them, and you can make your own Nutella with a little chocolate. American cranberry, nice plant, a very bitter berry. You make jams or jellies out of them, but if you have any over the winter time, the first plant the birds go to and the robins go to in the spring. Black chokeberry, also called aronia berry, high in antioxidants, very good plant to plant. Elderberry is the same way, one of those purple fruits, and high in antioxidants. They make jams and jellies out of, and juices, and wine too, I guess. Here's the honeyberry. If you've never seen one before, they're kind of oblong. They're from Canada. I actually was at the Agroforestry tour in Alberta, Canada. No, it was Quebec City, Canada. And we went on a tour. And then the next year I saw it in a farm discount store in Minnesota at the nursery. I thought, wow, that was pretty quick. But you have to be quick and understand the different pollination charts. And usually the nursery that sells these will have this. So Cinderella is really good. It almost has a yes along the bottom, along the side there, for almost all of them. And Tundra has a few no's, and Borealis has a few no's. So you got to figure out which is going to pollinate which one and make sure you get two. Okay. So there you go. Little hint on honeyberry. And here's University of Saskatchewan's done a lot of research on that. So if you want to learn more about haskaps or honeyberries, you can go there. There is a Honeyberry USA in Minnesota. That's a nursery in northern Minnesota that sells them, but I'm sure you probably have some nurseries out there. Okay, pest management and food forest. Number one, a number of pests can infest edible fruits and nuts. Before planting a food forest, plants with minimal pest should be considered. Volunteer groups can help manage it. The SWD, spotted wings Drosophila, may be a pest on many plants, especially raspberries. Consider educational kiosks or areas. And I'm just going to finish up a few slides. We have a Minnesota Harvester Handbook that our forestry team put together a couple of years ago. This is available through our Z link, z.umn.edu/MHH. And this is the topics that we cover. 8 edible mushrooms, 6 bark, sticks, woods, 4 edible greens and berries, 4 holiday decorations, and saps and syrups. Kind of interesting, and most of our state parks or state lands can be harvested, but only for family use and not for commercial use. Here's another book that was developed in Minnesota by our sustainable agricultural team and a specialist at Bemidji, I believe, and no, Staples. It was Staples, Minnesota. And this is a Z-link, z.umn.edu/perennial fruit. And what's on that book is these. And you can look more on the website. And I'm going to go one more. Oh, there's edibles. I have a website on this. This is my PDF that I just copied on there. But we don't have PDFs on our website, but you can copy that. I have all this information on the website there, umn.edu, or z.umn.edu/edibles. And edibles, you got to watch what you say about edibles these days. So I'm trying to correct my language on fruits and nuts instead of edibles. Communityfoodforest.com. This is Catherine Brigowski's book. So if you're interested in community food forest, this is a must. And so you can pick that up. And this is kind of my Z links. You can look back on this particular video. I think Pat's recording it. Or take a picture of it and then go from there. If you want to connect with our forestry team, we have My Minnesota Woods, z.umn.edu/mmw. And then we have our website on some of our resources. We have some invasive species books. Obviously, we're in the Midwest and you're in the far West, but if you want to look at some of the information or materials we have for sale for landowners, that's on that resource list there. And I think that's my last slide. My contact information is my last name, Wyatt, W-Y-A-T-T @umn.edu. And I'm based out of the Mankato Regional Office. Pat, I will stop sharing here. I think I can.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. That was great. And I'm realizing now I got to figure out what type of honeyberries I bought last year. So because I don't know if I know I bought 2 different kinds, but I don't know if they're compatible. So if you're willing to hang out for some questions, we
Sure.
did have a few in the chat that I want to make sure we get in the recording. Kelsey has some questions, but she had to leave. And then of course everyone else is welcome to ask questions, but I'm gonna Oh,
Pat,
go
can I
ahead.
interrupt for a second? I think I do recognize one person that I think I see on a video once in a while. CSR5. Is that the Rain Tree Nursery? Is I love it. I get your emails and appreciate your work. Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you. Yeah. Wow. It just blows my mind to actually be a part of watching somebody else give a presentation on edible food forests and public edible plantings. Thank you so much. It's great.
You're welcome. You can grow a lot more material, I think, fruits and nuts than we can in Minnesota, but because of our winters. But keep that nursery going up there. Cool.
That's exciting. I didn't realize we had someone from Raintree on, so welcome. That's great.
Thank you.
So Kelsey's first question was way back, looking at the ecological or the plant community descriptions that you had there.
Right.
So she says, we have ecological site descriptions through the USDA NRCS. Is that loosely what yours were based off of in Minnesota, or did you use something different?
You know, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how the information was gathered, but you can Google that. I'm not sure if I had a web link on that slide or not. I don't think I may have, but you can do that. I think it was mainly done by the Department of Natural Resources, but I'm not sure if they started with NRCS and some type of historical governmental type logs or not. But I think they did. They had to start somewhere. So so it might have been. And then I think they had some forestry logs that they were looking at in each county that was logged in the early days of tracking forests and different things like that. And we have a lost 40. I know there's a lost 40 bar somewhere. Oh, I know it's in Little Rock, Arkansas, where my daughter is. But there's a lost 40 trees, believe it or not, that's never been timbered. And they're just huge in this area of Minnesota that was never logged. And most of Minnesota has been logged, over the years, and almost to the point of too much logging. Well, really too much logging for them. But, yeah,
Michigan.
No, I don't know how to answer that, but I'd say try and go on the website, the DNR, and see if you can find out. And I can give you more information or the contact people for that if you like. If you want to email me.
Sure, absolutely. So one other question she had was regarding some of the graphics you had of the food forests. Do you know if those were used or done using AutoCAD or a different program? Did you do any of that yourself or with that?
I did not. Is she talking about
Outsourced.
the signage or?
No, like the actual graphics of the planting layouts, I think is what she's referring to.
Oh, I'm not sure. I just copied that off of what they had. Most of that is just off the screen, off some type of website. So I did not do any of that.
Okay. Outsourced.
That's plagiarized, I suppose.
Yeah, sure. All right, then Kelsey's last question, then we can get to any other questions the group has, was, do you have a recommendation, like a really user friendly recommendation for a PDF on designing a successful food forest? I know you mentioned a few in your talk.
Wow, I think the North Dakota State University Bulletin looks like the best one that I've seen, and maybe the only one really that I've seen for designing. It doesn't give a lot of pages, but it has more on the plants too. But it has a few pages on design, and I think that's a really good one to start with. And then obviously Catherine Bukowski's handbook, and then her website would be good to go on to. And actually, you could probably email her and ask her those questions too.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So I'll put it to the group now. Does anybody have any follow-up questions for Gary? I mean, I have a ton if no one does, but want to make sure everyone else gets their chance first.
I guess I kind of have some questions on the regulatory buffer.
Yeah.
Just with your state, how did that process look, and how did they determine that 50-foot? Because we were going through something similar to that this year, and it was the 235-foot buffer was being pushed.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it generated a ton of concern for some kind of working buffer, or even with our CREP program here.
Yes. We have a board of water soil resources that manages our SWCDs, so water conservation district offices. That's kind of where the state money funnels through. I think a lot of that came through their agency. I could probably give you some names to contact there. It is interesting. I know it was kind of a fight between farmers and the government legislators, because basically unless you got into an NRCS program on buffers and was accepted through a CRP program, and then obviously paid for 15 years your cash rent, equivalent for that county, you did not get paid for it. And it was basically, you had to do this or you're going to get penalized. And the penalty was pretty severe. I can't remember now. It was just, you're not going to do it. I mean, you're going to do this practice. You cannot afford not to do it. So the 16.5 feet is on a ditch. That's an open ditch system. Okay. And then a man-made ditch or a community ditch or a county ditch. And then the waterway, the river or stream. I'm not sure if a creek. So a creek, I think there's on the creek that we did this demonstration on actually should be a 50-foot buffer, but we did on the demonstration, we basically did a 16-foot and a 50-foot buffer, four rows of edible plants on a 50-foot buffer, and then one row on a 16.5-foot buffer, because 16.5 feet is not very big, and you don't want to crowd the plants with the crop and so forth. And you do need a buffer there. But yeah, it was difficult. I think Nick, you asked that question. Our farm organizations like Farm Bureau and corn soybean growers were very much into that discussion, and it was tough going there for a while. But not to get politics involved, but the governor we had, we don't have the same one, but it was a Democratic governor, and water quality was the big issue. And we've got obviously hypoxia in the Gulf of Mexico, and we're the start of the Mississippi River. I don't know if you knew that. Mississippi River starts in Minnesota at Itasca State Park, and it gets dirty from there on, and high in nitrates, and Iowa, almost flows into it from the Missouri and Des Moines River and so forth, and everything kind of, and the Ohio Valley flows into the Mississippi, and it just gets clogged down there. But yeah, it was I think they didn't even consider anything bigger than 50 feet. But I can give you some names of people that you can contact with the Board of Water Soil Resources, and they might be able to tell you more. And maybe if you look up on news releases or something back in, just do a Google search on Minnesota buffer law. And you might be able to find some news releases and stuff on that.
Cool. Thanks.
You bet.
Margaret? Okay.
Yeah. So I was wondering, we had some funding last year to do a preliminary design for one of our city's green stormwater infrastructure grants. So I did a design for a food forest, but
Great.
I was wondering about funding for actual implementation, because that money kind of went away without actually following through on it. And I heard you mention SNAP Ed, which is something that I've heard around before, but do you have other sources of funding for that kind of implementation as well?
I don't offhand. You may want to look at SARE and see if SARE might be a possibility. And then maybe even, NRCS, they have those conservation grants. I wonder, maybe see if there's any money, federal money that way, for food and community food, and check with your food nutrition people at in Extension. Pat probably can get you that list. And maybe that could be something you work together with them on, and they might have some government money that comes to grants. I think we have SNAP Ed grants that come federal money, and that support our staff to do that. And usually they're low income families, they're targets, but something like this, we had SNAP Ed help with our educational signage, and that was cool.
Cool.
I say too, Master Gardener, Gary mentioned it in his talk, but get in touch with your Master Gardener group, because that's a lot of free volunteer labor there from people that know what they're doing for the most
Right.
part. So,
I'm sorry, Pat, you may want to check with your PCA, Pollution Control Agency people, if you're in a watershed area or something, they may have some funds for that. I know in Minnesota, they are supportive of sustainable plants and food-bearing plants and so forth. Of course, if you're, well, maybe that's not, if it's a chemical cleanup, maybe that wouldn't be what you want to plant, but this is not. Okay.
anyone else got a question for Gary?
Yeah, hey, this is John. I've got a question. Thanks, Gary, for coming on.
Hey, John, you're welcome.
Incompatible plants. Do you have any thoughts on any plants that would be incompatible with with each other, the opposite of companion planting?
Wow, that's a great question. I have not experienced too many plants like that. I'd be aware of your noxious weed law in Wisconsin, in Washington. Obviously, you don't want to plant any noxious weeds or invasive species. We have a hard time with our honeysuckles because honeysuckles have been planted in windbreaks for years, and we have 3 invasive European honeysuckles that are hard to get off any landscape right now. And then barberries and so forth are tough. Yeah, Margaret mentioned walnuts. Walnuts, we do have maybe I'll send that to Pat too. We have there is a jung loam chemical or reaction to walnuts that plants can't grow around, but there are many plants that can grow around that oil in the soil. So just be aware of that. We've not found, of course, we don't have a lot of walnuts in these food forests because it just takes so long for the walnuts to grow and those types of things. So, but that's something to consider, certainly. But yeah, that's great, John. Boy, if you come up with something, let me know.
If no one has a question, I guess kind of on the follow-up of your comment about toxic areas. I think we talked about this actually at ANREP of have you ever encountered any issues with like heavy metals or anything in some of these urban areas, being remediated in the plants themselves? And I guess a companion question to that is, in terms of pest management, how do you navigate the use of pesticides in a community space like that too?
Right. Great question. I have not done any research on communities that have allowed spraying, like for apple trees and so forth. I'd say apple trees are probably your biggest, well, and raspberries for the spotted wings Drosophila, but raspberries can be, or apples can be your most maintenance tree, because if you're going to do a spray program, if you want good apples, I have plum cuculio in my personal orchard, and if you've had plum cuculio, I can show you pictures. They deform the apple early, and you cannot use them at all, not even for juice. I mean, so I didn't get out there quick enough. My sprayer froze up, and I read in small print, my little sprayer says, "Do not freeze," or "Do not allow to freeze." How about that? But anyway, I should have sent it to the basement. But yeah, so I've got to get out early next year. But that spraying pesticides, I think, is going to be probably a big thing for your food forest to reckon with. And you really need to decide early on if you want to plant apple trees or not. And then what are you going to do? Are you going to just let it go? And if you just see what happens, or use some of the organic type of collections, the banana and the jug, and draw some flies and so forth, the apple maggot and so forth. But sometimes those draw the insects to the tree too. But as for the contaminated ground on chemicals, I'm mainly seeing more woodies like hybrid poplars or willows used for biomass and not food sources. So I think that's probably the recommendation there for the chemical cleanups. And actually, we do have a new patented hybrid poplar in Minnesota that was just developed by our Northern Research Center in Cloquet and Duluth. So I can maybe send you that as soon as we get information on that.
just to be, my question was more not using them on purpose, but more accidental remediation of heavy metals that you didn't know were there on that site. Is there like, a testing
Oh.
routine that's recommended for a site prior to developing a community food forest or anything?
Oh, yeah, good question. Yeah, try and dig into the history as much as possible, I guess, with your
Right.
city or community. And yeah, if it is, filled with contaminants like pesticides or oils or a maintenance shop or something like that, yeah, you don't want to plant there for sure.
Great. Leave it to me to talk about the bummer components of
okay.
food forest, the less happy stuff.
There's devil's advocate in every crowd. That's right.
I
Pat.
don't want to bring it
We gotta
down.
hear from you.
If anybody's got any other questions, though, I mean, Gary, I don't know how much longer we have you for. It is 3 o'clock. No, we'll pass. But we did have another
Yeah.
question in the chat if you've got time.
Sure, go ahead.
So I had always heard fruit are the cleanest part of any edible plant that is growing in contaminated soil. Can anyone confirm this? Okay, so that's kind of part of our conversation. Yeah, I can't. Have you read any research that shows how those contaminants might be remediated within the plant?
I have not. I've heard, actually, believe it or not, here's a story about agriculture. So in swine, they give antibiotics in the feed, okay? And it's been detected. Okay, so let me go through the cycle. So we have swine barns in the Midwest, and I'm sure you have swine barns out there, confinement areas that are pumped out. The liquid manure is spread on farmland, okay? And it's been detected then in, I think, both corn and soybeans, some of these additives, believe it or not, in the feed are being detected in the corn and soybeans that are being harvested. Is that something? And it's through the manure, and then it goes through the soil, and then it goes through the plant. So yeah, it's amazing that you think something wouldn't exist like that, but yeah, things do. I would be careful about anything, but I think let's see, I forgot your name from Raintree, but
Laura.
anyway, Laura.
Sure.
I think if your fruit looks good and the plant looks healthy, I think that's pretty good indication that you're probably okay, most generally. But yeah, I just give you that little story about corn and soybeans, but there you go. Yeah, but if it's an edible fruit and you're having a problem with a tree or shrub and the fruit looks damaged, don't eat it. And probably even remove it from the area, not even compost it, I'd say, if you have questions about that.
And Mark just left a comment. It sounds like he's done a little bit of research on this as well.
Okay.
A little more information in there.
Oh, good. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, any other questions for Gary? We didn't really even dig into the Silvopasture stuff.
Maybe another time.
Okay. All right. Well, then, Gary, thank you. I appreciate it.
Super.
Yeah, we're really very grateful for you coming in and giving us your talk. It's very cool, the stuff you're doing over there.
Thank you. Yeah, call anytime. Nice to meet you in Wisconsin, or not Wisconsin. I keep saying Wisconsin, Michigan, or no, Michigan. Yeah, Michigan State. Holy cow, all over the Midwest. And now I'm speaking to you guys at Washington. I can't even get my words straight here. Yeah, nice to meet you guys. And nice to meet Laura from Raintree. That's cool.
Yeah, great talk. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Feel free to email me with your questions too, if you like. Thank you.
Great. Thanks,
Bye.
Gary. Great. So yeah, we reserved the last half hour for these meetings to do a little bit of round table update kind of stuff. If anyone has to hop off, I completely understand, but we'll hang out. And yeah, if I guess we can just leave the floor open real quick. I have some updates, but I thought, Nick and Margaret, you mentioned the Silvopasture project, and I think really that's what I'm really interested in learning more about, frankly. If you're willing to share a little more on that.
Yeah, and we have a couple newer folks too. So yeah, this is a time to just share a project you might be working on around agroforestry, ask questions.
Yeah.
You
Partnership
know,
building.
yeah, just a little bit of like a show and tell or a sharing time here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess I'll start. I'm just wondering. I mean, I come from a permaculture background, and bringing that to Raintree, which also has been really active in permaculture. But I want to, and I do encourage people who are customers to start thinking about their edible plants, not just for themselves, their human selves, but also for any kinds of animals that they may be keeping on their property. And the idea of tree hay, the idea of edible hedgerows and buffers is something that we're very interested in talking to people about. And I'm trying to put together some categories in Raintree that are really more about harvesting edible woody plants for animals. Whether you're allowing the animals to do the harvesting by planting, in a protected area and the animals harvest it themselves, or you cut the branches and attach them to the fence, or whatever you do. But I really think that the time has come to start talking about that. And also, I was really excited to get a hold of the new Coppice book, Coppice Agriculture, from Mark Krausiak. I know I'm just mangling the heck out of his name, I'm sure. But I also see that he is having a Zoom workshop that I think is like an 8-week session. And the information that he is bringing forward, I think, is just so important when it comes to regenerative agriculture and silviculture. And I get this feeling that people don't know much about it. So I wanted to bring that to the group, just as my contribution to see if everybody here knows about that or is interested in that, and just, put it out there.
I hadn't heard of that, so that's really
Yeah. If you haven't seen that book, it is amazing. I did get a copy, and we have so many species too that are great for coppicing. A lot of our natives are great for coppicing and using for actually animal feed, or for all kinds of crafting materials or building materials or what have you. Yeah, so that's a great resource if you guys haven't seen it.
Who's the author again?
I was gonna see if I could find my copy really quick, or give you guys a
See if I can
link.
find my copy. I'll be right back.
Yeah.
I'm looking at it too, and I'm afraid to butcher the name as well. But it's Mark Krausiak.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah,
It's
good, well researched, really, really good. Yeah, a good volume to have in the office for reference and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Laura, just kind of spitballing, because I've never been up to Raintree, kind of always wanted to, but is there interest or space for you guys to do some sort of demonstration buffer, or some kind of what you're talking about, of installing something for educational purposes?
Oh, good question. We've actually closed the garden center, and we don't have the public on the property, but for very rare occasions. There are great examples of edible buffers in many different areas. I mean, there's a great one in Seattle, up in the Sunnyside neighborhood, like 105th and
is that the one that Gary mentioned?
I don't know.
No.
No, it's different.
But that's smack dab in the middle of residential Seattle. It would be, I mean, if it would be of use to the group, I can certainly do some research before our next gathering to see where there are some extant examples of this, and so that folks know where to direct interested parties to. Is that
Hmm.
what you're thinking about?
Well, more or less. I mean, and just thinking, trying to get landowners to adopt this. It's always good for them to be able to see it first.
Mhm.
And you know, my area is Southwest Washington, and I'm not going to get anybody to go to Seattle. So, you know,
Right.
so finding, yeah, basically exactly what you're talking about, of being able to have a network of potential demonstration sites for those kind of things, and people that can discuss, you know, what all went into implementation and stuff. And, you know, that's always really important for education and increasing adoption.
Well, I
Well,
think, go ahead.
I was just going to say there's common ground in Olympia, which has, you know, a fantastic, really well planned and planted and maintained public food forest style garden, and they have some really fantastic street side plantings that could simply be, you know, lifted and used in more rustic settings.
I feel like I
But
should know about that.
and that's, you know, that's not sending people up into the heart of the urban area, but
Right.
I think too, it'll be good also, the more examples we can find to also demonstrate to regulators, like Nick brought up, because the desire to plant these systems is one thing, but the regulation that surrounds a lot of our streams and ditches and surface water is another thing. And then funding being all tied up around that regulation as well. So there's a lot to navigate there, and a lot of different types of folks that it'd be good to see the benefit of these systems.
Yeah, I've tried to float a working buffer, because in like forested buffer, like the NRCS practice, it says special consideration, you know, on tree, shrub, site selection for that dual purpose. And it took a lot of convincing. And basically the conversation ended with, okay, if they wanted to go in and take a couple berries, yes, but nothing for other than a little bit of home use here and there.
Mhm.
So it was better than nothing, but so that's kind of what we're butting up against, where, you know, us, we believe in the benefits of buffers, but still at the same time to find that common or middle ground.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Yeah.
with a lot of our working lands needing to have that space in production in some way. So, yeah.
Got to figure out native food producing species that we can trick the NRCS with. That's what it sounds like to me.
Well, and a market
Right. Yeah.
development for some of the amazing species that can be grown in these systems. There's some great ones, but not necessarily a market, a well-developed market.
I mean, what about elderberry? Shoot, you've got blue elderberry that grows like a weed.
Yeah.
In those sorts of systems. You just can't put enough elderberry out on farmers market tables and into production during that harvest time. So yeah,
and aronia.
Right, but I don't know if aronia is considered native, is it?
Well, no, I'm not sure blue elderberry is either, though, in our area.
Oh yeah.
So, well, yeah, I mean, some are and some aren't. Yeah, but yeah, no, I was at a farmer's market and talked to a woman selling elderberry products and asked her where she sourced her elderberry. And she was all over the place. And I said, hey, if local farmers were growing this, would you buy it from them? And she was like, oh yeah, that would be fabulous. So, yeah.
Are there different restrictions by county about what you can plant in wetlands, or is that a state prohibition?
It's state and federal. There are all layers of regulation. So because we have endangered species too, right? So water quality is one thing, but also endangered species. So we've got then federal layers, state layers, and then local layers of regulation around surface waters. Yeah.
Is there any data about how things like spotted wing Drosophila are affecting native plants? Because that's one that affects all types of commercial soft fruits. So that would be in going back to like the talk about if we're using pesticides in the garden, that would be pretty much necessary to present like a good product if it's a commercial harvest, because the time gap to when Drosophila hatch out is just about right for it to arrive at Fresh Market or
Right.
to show up in someone's refrigerator when they get the food home.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm wondering too, if looking at, I mean, if you have blackberry anywhere near, right, then you're going to have spotted wing Drosophila. Yeah, I'm wondering too, though, about looking at inserting species that that attract certain beneficial insects as well, and seeing if there's, you know, also a dance to be done there without just, and maybe as a way to reduce pesticide application, or I don't know. Anyway.
It seems like in the community context, you could, I mean, like Gary said, you just figure out what you want ahead of time. And those low maintenance species are the best. Like apples are going to be a lot. I mean, that you might need pesticides for that. But then, you know, being very transparent about the use of pesticides as well. Because I understand that there are people that will see any pesticide use and they will no longer engage with that forest.
Yeah.
But there's an education component there too as well.
Yeah.
Understanding the use of certain pesticides, and that some are, you know, they're safe for this kind of thing, obviously, if they're being used for it. So, you know, I don't think it's completely impossible to use all the tools at your disposal in a community food forest.
And I just want to read Carrie's comment too, because we have Carrie from NRCS here, which is great because she can give us that NRCS perspective. And I think she's having some technical difficulties, but she said it would be possible for NRCS to help with food forests, particularly in urban interface for personal use, but it becomes more difficult for planting for a commercial market. Because they see it like helping, like it would be paying a wheat farmer to plant more wheat.
Sure.
Yeah, because a lot of what they do is based on some type of natural resource concern, and not necessarily the economics of the farm. So yeah, that's interesting from the NRCS perspective on what they could fund.
Yeah, I guess I never thought about it. There wouldn't. I'm curious because there's not like a production requirement, right? And someone doesn't have to be a producer to necessarily be eligible for something like equip.
Right. And I think, and I don't know if Carrie can correct me, I think programs like CSP and some of those can, especially, you know,
Right.
if there's a wildlife enhancement or a habitat enhancement quality to a project.
It's interesting.
Those can be some resources.
I also wonder if there aren't resources available through food security oriented organizations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be interesting. I've not.
Well, that was that SNAP Ed piece that you mentioned.
Yeah, right.
Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, I think is what
Right.
SNAP stands for.
Because
So-
SNAP will allow people who receive the money to buy edible food plants as long as those edible food plants can be expected to produce food within 2 years.
We funded a community garden slash, it is hopes to be a food forest one day, but we did it through Farms and Translation. So, you know, targeting our predominantly Hispanic, Spanish speaking Guatemalan neighborhoods and doing that. Survivability and participation has been low, but our AmeriCorps now is kind of improving on that. We've also have another garden we funded through a pollinator program, which came from capital funding. It was natural resource investments. So we have about $30,000 there to, it was either renovate existing gardens or construct a new community garden. And so that project is looking at, there's a houseless veterans village going in Shelton that we did a landscaping plan for, and we are using that funds to implement the garden. And one of our takes on that was to construct a food forest that, you know, through, you know, possibly working with the master gardeners and our own AmeriCorps folks to maintain, and just that way there's no commitment for the, you know, people living in the tiny house village, that they could come and access it, you know, as part of that healing aspect of it and therapeutic aspect, but so that there is somebody there kind of steering the ship and maintaining it. So there's some creative ways you can just make it connect.
And I think those spaces too are a great opportunity for also incorporating our natives, bringing in habitat elements, and then educating the public as to what our useful natives are as well. Yeah, I just think there's a lot of opportunity in these types of space, riparian buffers, and within these community food forests to bring in those elements and educate on those elements too. How you use some of those food resources that we have right here, that grow here readily.
So Mark did ask a question in the chat, and Nick and Margaret, I don't know if you actually can talk about the Silvopasture project, if it's just too early, or, you know, but he was curious in learning a little more about the site prep.
I have some before photos I can share.
I'm sure I can make you I can give you permission.
Do we see it? Oh, do we see it?
Yeah.
So VSP, you know, it's tied to salmon. So on this one, there's a couple independent tributaries that outlet into Hammersley Inlet. They have been identified as by DFW as salmon bearing, and you know, it's what we see time and time again here. It's wooded lots being used for, you know, winter confinement. So part of this project, through the shellfish funding, we're revamping a heavy use area. So we'll have a, you know, a true winter confinement area, like a concrete pad associated with the barn, to discourage this practice in the future. So instead of just letting Scotch broom come take it over, we want to thin and seed, basically. He's a pretty savvy landowner. You can see in this picture, we're gonna put a buffer, establish, you know, fence off this wetland, and they're kind of put in a, not an access road, but a trail and a walkway for livestock movement. So this does have the potential to be an off-channel like rearing pool for salmon, and it does feed into that tributary and into Hammersley. So this is kind of what we're going into. So it does have a lot of the capabilities and equipment to do a lot of the thinning. So Margaret and I, if we hopefully going out there next week, where Margaret's going to do her forestry thing, and I'm going to do the, just we heard earlier, clover and orchard grass mostly. I know I've seen some of Marty Cheney's recommendations from NRCS at some of the Silvopasture that she helped put in our county years ago. And most of that is just fescue, a couple different kinds of fescue and orchard grass. The clover on the other property that Marty had helped, I'm pretty sure was, not included in those seeding recommendations because the herbicide that landowner is using kills clover. So there's low survivability of that. So I don't know if fixation, like Balanza clover, how well that is shade tolerant, but I'm just hearing better and better things about it and its cold tolerance.
What's it called?
It's fixation.
No,
It's a
you said Balanza?
Yeah. So it's fixation clover. I think that's its like name brand, but it's a fixation Balanza. I mean, some of the pictures I've seen, like the clover is as big as your hand, and it was developed in the Pacific Northwest, pretty cold tolerant. I know Pierce CD, like Allison over there, has been looking at trialing it, and that's who I heard it from, and some of the farmers here have talked about it. So we actually seeded a bunch of that today in our community garden. So yeah, we've got $9,000 on this funding pool in a couple acres.
That's exciting.
Yeah, and this is the guy that does maple syrup.
I know. I would really like to get out there.
Yeah, so my plan is to have him sign a disclosure form, so hopefully we can share more information and maybe get you out there, because it'd be fun to have, some more of us a part of the process, if we can document it. And this is a really good landowner to trial it on.
Yeah.
They're pretty, his manure storage structure, he on his own plumbed in the PEX pipe in the concrete to draw heat off, and plumbed it all up to collect leachate, and so he's known to go above and beyond. So I'm pretty excited it was a nice surprise to walk into that little bit of money.
Yeah, that's great. But it is 3:30 and I actually have another meeting to go into. So I'm gonna, well, first I should stop the recording somehow. There we go.